Okay, I think we're all ready to get started. Thank you all for coming.
Are these on now?
Like I said, there's plenty of areas here. We'll have a nice echo. A nice conversation. Well, we have a set of panelists here today in order to talk about user experience and user research questions that you may have around apps that you're developing. And what we were thinking of focusing on is that personal experiences. There's obviously the personality of your app and the elements that you contribute to that, but there's also creating emotion with the users that you're interacting with and providing elements that are very important and valuable to them. It's critical to your success. And so we want to take a little bit of time to think of that and talk about it, but it's also open to other UX questions that you may have also. So don't be shy. This is a panel conversation, so please jump in. There's microphones on either side of the room for you in order to ask questions. A nice person just dropped off a bunch of gifts also in order for us to hand out for people who ask extremely good questions. So maybe that's a little incentive. Lori, could you hold up, there's a power bank, and then there's a little speaker also. There you go. That's right. So what we're going to do first is just kind of have the panelists introduce themselves, and that way you get to know who they are and what their background has been, and then we'll get you guys to introduce a few of yourselves also and start asking questions.
Can you guys hear me? I'm Karina Black, hiding in the back here. As it says on screen, you can see here, I now work on the Internet of Things team. I previously worked on Windows Phone, focused in the app space. A variety of different apps, email, calendar, browser, just to name a few. And I also focused a little bit on helping third-party developers create better app experiences for the store. And so I guess I'll hand it off to the next person.
Eddie? Right. Oh, well, I apologize, the slide order is different from the
Hi, I'm Lori Kratzer. I'm a design PM, actually in the Windows Phone studio originally. I was one of the original team members, so I've been there for a while. Worked on developing the design language, which we used to call Metro, the shell interaction model, and common controls. So I spent a lot of time working on convergence this last year and a half, and spending more and more time with developers trying to work with and figure out what are the challenges you're facing to make better and more contextual UI.
Hi, I'm Mary Lynn Williams, and I have previously worked only in the big Windows space, and now I'm working in both Windows and Windows Phone, and I do apps primarily, and some apps that my team worked on in the past, the alarms, reading list, people, photo editors, stuff like that. And now I'm going to be doing actually a little bit more than that, and some of what Karina mentioned, working with third-party developers to help them make the best apps they can make.
I'm Amy Alberts. I lack pictures of myself.
Sorry.
It's my fault. I am a design researcher. I manage the design research team in Windows, so responsible for the desktop, tablets, and phone. I was on phone for a really long time, so I know a lot about our users and needs for mobility, et cetera. And I'm here to help us kind of talk through strategies for capitalizing on what you know about your user and creating designs that are great for them.
Hi everyone, is that working? Yeah. Hi everyone, my name is Tom Eddings. I'm a design lead in our modern apps team in the UK. I help some of our top partners building apps primarily for Windows Phone. Recently working with, the main app I'm working on at the moment is Facebook, also working with British Airways, and then the most recent app that we shipped was Beats Music, which shipped over here in the US.
Hi, I'm Dave Crawford. I'm also a design lead in the UK apps team. Again, we work on some of the big brands. We also help a lot of our partners who are trying to build apps of their own with help around design questions and that kind of stuff. Main apps I'm working on at the moment, there's a variety of them, but one of the big ones at the moment is Spotify. You might have seen that get announced a couple months ago, actually, at MWC.
Hi, my name is Eddie Mays. I'm a design manager for Xbox. Been at Microsoft for about 17 years. Since 2007, I've been in Xbox, and I've shipped NXE, Kinect, most recently Xbox One. Most recently, I've been working on Xbox apps evangelism, and the developer platform, so I really care about developer experiences from the ADK to the XDK to even publishing. So excited to be here and talk to you guys all the developers out there. So.
And I'm Laura Heine. I work in the operating systems group with user experience of third-party apps. And so many of you may be people with whom I'll be working in the future. And now we'd like to learn a little bit about you and how we can help. So of the people who are here, how many of you have already built a Windows Phone app? Wonderful. And Windows Store app? Great. Desktop apps? Okay. And enterprise apps? Nice proportion there, too. This is really good. And consumer apps? Okay. Well, we're equally represented here. This is really nice to see. That's great.
Xbox?
And, oh, yes. I apologize, Eddie. And for Xbox? Okay, all right. Very good, very good. So let's just see. Does anybody have any questions to kick things off immediately, or shall we? Oh, come on. There we go. Yeah.
So going forward with the common UI, how should my navigation be? Should it be inside the app? Should it be in the top application bar? So, for example, I can't have a top application bar in the Windows Phone. So should the guidelines tell me that my navigation should be inside the app? Did you get the question?
You can have navigation in the Windows Phone app bar. It just needs to be your primary task, and your secondary tasks go in the menu. So you're talking about on-object UI versus what's in the app bar?
I mean top application bar. So for example, the default for Windows 8 is the top application bar. While I don't have a top application bar in the Windows Phone, so if I'm targeting building a unified application, where should I put my navigation?
So there are a couple of things you can do around that. As Laurie mentioned, you can use the bottom map bar, but you don't have to use one of the standard controls that ships with Windows Phone. In a few of the apps that we've shipped recently, we've introduced like a draw control, like you see on other platforms. That tends to work well for that kind of navigation pattern, especially because you tend to use the top app bar more for kind of lateral navigation rather than hierarchical navigation. So we find that that works well for that situation. It's currently a custom control that we've built, but it's not the most difficult control in the world to build, I don't think. But that's one option you can use.
And you don't necessarily have to have the top app bar on Windows if you're using the hub control, using a depth navigation model. That scales well across Windows and Windows Phone, we found.
There is a new converged app bar control in the XAML framework in Jupyter. So you can do that and target both phone, and it'll put it at the bottom as well as Windows.
And you can also, if you want to follow up with some specific stuff afterwards, we're all going to be in expert one-on-one area and whatnot for like targeted specific questions about your navigation.
Just a comment, complementing the first question. In Sean Oyster's session yesterday, he mentioned that the maximum number of common app bar will be 5. So previously we used to have like 9 buttons per page in the Windows Phone, 4 app bar, and 5 menu items. So I was wondering now, with this 5 restricted maximum number, is it just 5 common app bar, or 5 primary and another 5 secondary, or how will it be?
You can have up to 5 on the primary. And so even though you can have 5, we want you to think really hard about which ones actually need to be there versus the ones that you put secondary, which would show up in the menu. The ones that you put on primary should really be the 1 or 2, maybe 3 things that they need to do, and that you really want the user to see that are most primary, and put the rest in the menu. So the menu scrolls, so you can have as many items really as you want in the menu.
That's for the phone?
That's on phone. And Windows, I think you can put, I don't think there's a limit on how many you can put in the menu, the secondary tasks either. Mm-hmm. But if you want to share the same exact code, that's why it's 5, so that you get, because that's the most that phone will fit in the app bar.
Okay, and this 5, when it wraps to the phone, will it be just 4 app bars and 1 in the menu, like 4 primary and 1 in the secondary?
Yeah, it'll start to move them after the 4. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm still strict to having 4 application bar icons?
If you have to, yes.
Thank you.
It'd be sweet if you had less than 4.
You also need to think about what the primary purpose of the page is. I mean, you've got quite a small screen with Windows Phone, so you don't want to be building a UI that has so many primary commands on it. Think more about kind of focusing on a couple of tasks, like Laurie said, and keep those.
But now they mentioned that the spaces is going to decrease, so whatever was 10 pixels is going to shrink down to 8 pixels. So I was wondering if this is the same for the app bar, so maybe we can squeeze in a 5th one, or is it just the primary 4, and then I would go to the menu items?
My understanding is that it's restricted to 4.
Okay, thank you.
Karina, did you have anything to add?
I think just in general, it's, and I think Lori, everybody's kind of alluded to this, it's just really important to think about what it is that you need to expose at the high level to users, and thinking more in depth about that and really focusing in on what's most important and exposing those at the high level just makes for a better user experience.
So I think there's an overall principle too, that where we're really striving for simplicity, I think across all of our clients. And so when you think about the scale, like global scale of where we want every client to actually support our brand language and our functionality, I think when you minimize the amount of visual noise, clutter, the amount of elements that I have to navigate and drill down into, you're going to make for a better experience across clients. And so simplicity is really the principle I think we're trying to drive home.
And if you think about Hicks' law, right, there's a 58% decrease in users' ability to make good choices when there's more than one option. So really try and like those decisions, which items you put on your app bar and which menu or tasks you expose, should be really hard decisions to make. You should be agonizing over the few that you're going to put there, and that will make your app experience even better.
It's okay. You can go ahead and say more. And then we'll move on to she has a follow-up clarification, and then we can go ahead and move on to your question.
Just a quick question. When should I feel that I need to put this button as an app bar button or just a normal button? Because when you go to the native experience of the phone, you can find in the setting page that you can have some buttons as a normal buttons, but other times you can have it as an application bar. So how could I know?
It really does depend what your page is doing. We tend to use the app bar for things that affect the entire page, and we put buttons on the screen if it affects just a small area. But having said that, we try to avoid having lots of buttons peppered on the screen. We have other services such as press and hold menus and things for
But
that.
I have the classical example, like a login page with just the username and the password, and maybe I will allow login using Facebook. So should I put the Facebook icon as an application bar, or should I put it as a button? Because it works both ways.
On a page like that, I personally don't have any particular preference. I mean, to put a login button on the page is fine. Put a Facebook login as well is also fine on the page there as well. The only time we might suggest you might want to put the login button into the app bar is if you don't want the login button to be covered up by the keyboard.
And is it correct that now we don't need this Remember Me button, since moving to the mobile first thing, it's logical that if I logged in once, then I will offer a logout as a menu item rather than having the Remember Me for checking that I should be staying logged into this app? Like some people, when they are coming from the web, they think about that the login screen should be natively at the web page. A login button, a login text box and a password and a checkbox for remembering my credentials. So usually we mention that if we are in a mobile platform, the trend now is that I just omit this button because naturally I will log in once. And then if I would like to log out, then I would find the logout option in the tray menu. So if this is the best practice for it, or if someone would like to maintain this Remember Me button, it's okay.
I think it really depends on the app. We see quite a few banking apps where they don't want to have your credentials always remembered, whereas other social networking apps, for example, always do want to have your credentials remembered. So it really depends on the app that you're building. If you want to make it super clear, you could always tell the user that you're going to be storing their credentials until they log out. But I think it's a case-by-case basis.
And I can comment a little bit on what to put on screen and what to put in app bars and the way that we think about it when we're designing, because if you've seen the photo editor in Windows 8.1, we have some controls on screen, and one of the reasons that we put those on screen instead of the app bar is because there are different controls for brightness and just changing saturation, et cetera, for a photo. And the photo is up on screen, and we didn't want people to have to be going in and out of the app bar to do a single action on that photo. The other thing that we tend to think about it is if it's a primary action. For instance, in our mail apps, the reply button is on screen. So we try to think of if this is something that we think 80% of users are going to be doing all the time, it's okay to put it on screen, but just like Dave said, we try not to bombard people with too many buttons because it becomes distracting. And the way Lori said, that once there's more than one option, it becomes decreasingly clear what you're supposed to do as a user.
Yeah, I don't want to take more time, but just one last question regarding the universal app. Now we are omitting the panorama thing because I notice now that we have 3 apps, either a Windows Store app or a Windows Phone app or the universal app. So if I went directly to the normal Windows Phone app, will I still have my pivot and panorama views, or now it is being replaced by the hub?
You will still have pivots on a phone app if you're creating just a phone app and not a universal app. In a universal app, you wouldn't have pivots. You'd have to make those specifically for your phone view. But there is a shared hub control. So we did create a new hub control that's shared between phone and Windows. So you would get effectively what we used to call panorama on phone. Is what you would get with the hub. And it has its own style, so you would spend some time in the view optimizing for the tablet versus the phone, but you can use
I
the
will
same.
no longer have my normal panorama control
Right.
with the panorama items. I will have to do it via the hub template.
If you want to use the converge control, yes, you would have to do it.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dave Platt. I'm a columnist for MSDN Magazine, and I'm the author of the book Why Software Sucks. On the web at whysoftwaresucks.com, naturally. And I have a more general philosophical question. I'm going to see if I can get these guys to fight. And that is, what about applications? What I'm about to say does not apply to games. Games you very much get immersed in, and those are things that you care greatly about. But I'm going to say that I have a real problem with applications that draw a great deal of attention to themselves. The classic example of that is the Amazon Kindle Reader for the Windows Phone, which flashes the live title at you every 20 seconds to tell you which book you were just reading, in case you had forgotten, perhaps. And I'm going to take that one step further. I'm going to say that, and ask you if you agree or disagree, that the users don't care about your programs in and of themselves, ever, at all. Never have, never will. They only care about what your programs do for them, and therefore that your programs should aim to be completely and totally unnoticed. Donald Norman wrote a book called The Invisible Computer, where he says the application should completely, as far as possible, completely and totally disappear. I agree with him. What do you think?
I would agree and disagree. So let me just start with why I disagree. You install apps to solve a specific problem, suit a series of needs. Live tiles are a really great opportunity at a glance on the phone in particular to expose like the stuff that you care about, the content you care about. So I think that's a huge value to the live tiles. Maybe the example with Kindle, not necessarily. Maybe they should reconsider what they're showing on the live tile. But certainly there are apps. Facebook, for instance, I, as a user, definitely want to know what's going on within my social circles, so I want to see updates on the live tile so I can see it at a glance. I want to see if there's something that I want to dig deeper into, so I think it's important to expose that information. Depending on the app, but I think a good many of apps can definitely benefit from the functionality that we have with live tiles and calling attention to themselves.
I think another thing to consider is that apps themselves can actually expose options to users, such as not having live tiles, or would you like this tile to be live or not in the settings. I think in terms of the particular app you're talking about, I think that's something that the developer would be quite interested to receive as feedback. Also, the start screen of Windows Phone is totally customizable and up to the user. So if they don't want to have that tile spinning around, they could take it off, or they could move it further down the page, or they could make it smaller where they don't flip around when they're the tiny tiles, which will be obviously coming in with 8.1. So there are quite a few different ways of doing it. In terms of apps just blending into the background and not really standing out, I think that's a really difficult situation. It's something that I think, and these guys worked on the platforms, they can probably answer better than I can, that we try and achieve with Windows Phone, where the native experiences are very simple, very unbranded, like you get straight to the point of what you're trying to achieve. But then the additional third-party apps, they kind of need to have a way of standing out from others in order to be able to compete against each other. For example, if you have two different book reading apps, which one do you go to? And they need a way of showing unique features and unique experience to the user. So I think it does go both ways on this. I think if you only had one single platform, one single ecosystem that was closed, then totally agree that it all blend into the background. But I think as soon as you open it up to other people, people need a way of standing out against the competitors.
I also kind of take the philosophy behind that, right? So, the invisible computer, I would argue that the live tiles are actually a progression toward that, more so than going away from it. And I think it's really about transparency, about understanding that there is technology that's sitting there that is available for usage and allowing some transparency about what its state is, what you can do with it, et cetera. So from my perspective, kind of looking at like where we are going just generally with technology and the human needs that are associated with that, I agree absolutely that we are all moving toward needing technology to be transparent, to be something that is just natural to interact with. again, I would argue a step toward that is for apps to manifest themselves in a way that a user can know what it is that they are without having to interact with them.
In that particular case of Amazon, I think it would be absolutely beautiful if the book cover just kind of sat there.
Fair.
That's
Yeah.
kind of what books do. They sit there and they kind of wait for you to come back and say, "Hey, look, man, when you're ready to relax, here I am," and that'd be cool. But flashing in my face every 20 seconds, that kind of.
I think the other thing as well is I look at the templates when we're talking about.
Flashing in my face every 20 seconds when it hasn't changed.
Sure, I would make it small in that case if that was irritating. The other thing that when I'm talking to clients about it is I talk about the tile templates, and they're really great because they allow apps to stand out and they provide a mechanism to show that information, but equally they allow the tiles to be consistent. So there's that Windows Phone look and feel because they're using the tiles, or the Windows look and feel if they're using Windows. So
The general philosophy, I'll just add this, for tiles when we first developed them, is that it's supposed to be if there's something new and now and fresh that you to draw attention to.
Yes.
Otherwise, it becomes noise to the user and they start ignoring.
Absolutely.
So apps need to be really careful about when they're pushing content to those tiles, because it is meant to grab attention. And the more you push and the less relevant the content is in those tiles, the more the users are going to either make them small, ignore them, or unpin them. So, use that as a way to get attention when it's necessary and when it's important and relevant.
I think it's
agree
great
completely.
that users have complete control, as Dave pointed out, over the start screen, so they can get rid of the stuff that they don't care about. So if an app's not giving them what they need, they can, they'll definitely remove it. I mean, in the case of the Kindle, example that you just talked about, I tend to read like 4 or 5 books at once.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they could change it so they could kind of cycle through those different books. I think that might be interesting to remind me of the books that I have open that I haven't, or I have started and haven't read.
Mm-hmm.
So there are definitely some considerations that developers need to make sure they're, popping the content at the top that really matters to users. But again, users are under they control everything, so that if they don't like it, they can get rid of it.
I guess in that particular case, I was on the Windows 8 phone, you couldn't turn off a live tile. You could either shrink it small or take it off the start screen, but you couldn't say just sit there nicely, please.
Right.
Who else, please? Yeah. Ladies first.
Oh, thank you. Hello, I'm a new app designer just starting out, and some of the concerns I've been having when I'm designing is that some of my stakeholders want me to design to the app specifications exactly. Like, they freak out if it's not exactly 100 pixels from the top and 120 pixels from the left. And others, if I do follow the specifications, they feel like the design is not personal enough or tailored enough. What is your perspective on how flexible the guidelines are?
The guidelines are flexible, and I think the thing that I always tell people is that they're there as a starting point, and I think we were a little stricter about that when we first started shipping these products, just to kind of create some consistency across the user experience. But we encourage you guys to be creative and do things that you think are beautiful in your apps.
I do think there's a balance, though. There's elements of the system that are there that the user learns. Sorry, I can't see you. And you want to utilize that learning, but again, you still want to differentiate yourself. So when you do things that are different and custom and more creative, do them with a purpose and thoughtfully. If it's you're trying to create a simple navigation model, trust the system and use the system in that case, because the user will be able to use your app better and they'll be happier. But use that creativity when it's thoughtful and when it's purposeful, I think is the right balance.
And when it comes down to, you raised a specific point there about laying pages out and margins and that kind of thing. We don't tend to be as strict about the specific margins that you're using, provided you're consistent within your app and you provide the user with a consistent experience inside that little kind of portion of their experience. That's fine as far as we're concerned. As the guys mentioned, they're there as a place to start you off. And give you an idea of the kind of things we like to see, the behaviors we like to encourage. But they're not you will not fail store submission because you're, 32 pixels on the edge instead of, 24.
And if you think about the things that you might shift from the guidelines, I would think about if there are things that are used throughout all of the apps, like the app bar, for instance. That's something that maybe your users are going to be encountering that across the system in other apps, and they're going to get used to it. If you veer too far away from that, then it's going to be, if you think it's going to be a usability challenge, I would stick to the guidelines in those cases.
Okay.
But as far as, exactly how many pixels and how you treat your brand on the page, I think the branding is the most probably important thing for you to be able to convey at the start. So I would be creative and find something that's usable and works.
I think some of the innovations we've seen from the Bing apps is quite a good example. So they're using the standard controls, so they're using panoramas, but they've removed the headers. So they're pushing the content to the forefront, but users are still familiar enough to understand that it's a panorama control, so they can still scroll horizontally. So I think that's quite a good example of where there's been slight pieces of innovation with those controls, still using the standard controls.
So in terms of usability too, I think what we've been saying about the consistency with controls across the system is really critical. In terms of layout, I think from a usability perspective, it's better to be consistent within than between. If you're needing to choose between the two. And so if your app experience has consistencies in layout and allows users to kind of acclimate themselves and figure out where I am in the world, getting that right is I would say more important if you're really figuring out a trade-off than making sure it's consistent with the Mail app, for example. But the controls are one thing, layouts are another when it comes to the usability of an app.
There's a conversation that we often have with design partners and with agencies around carrying brands and styles across their apps and different platforms, because they don't want to do their jobs twice and redesign for every platform. As you can understand, they like to have a common design language, and you can probably keep the majority of design language and apply it to Windows Phone as well. You have challenges around navigation and a few things that are just slightly different about our platform that are different to the other ones out there. One of the pieces of reasoning we use to push back sometimes with some of our partners is, provided you produce a really great experience for the user on their phone, they're not going to be sat there, it's unlikely they'll be sat there with a Windows Phone, an iPhone, and Android, and your app open and all three at the same time, all scrolling through them looking for differences.
Yeah.
They just want something that respects the fact they've invested, hundreds or a couple of $1,000s and a few years in a device. They want something that respects that investment. So that's what I think is more important there.
As long as it delivers something that they're happy with and follows the Windows Phone navigation system and everything, then it's okay if it's not exactly identical to their other.
Totally, and it doesn't even need to fit the Windows Phone navigation model exactly. If you've got something that makes more sense to the user while they're using the app, as these guys mentioned, it's keeping it consistent with your app and something that makes sense from a usability perspective. We love seeing innovation, and I love downloading apps from the store that really wow me and blow me away. So please keep doing that.
Absolutely. We want to see that sort of innovation. We want you guys to help us push the platform, and if the controls and the app patterns that we have aren't suiting your needs, you certainly need to push things a little bit further. So we highly encourage that, actually.
We will learn from you as well.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you
very much. Hi, my name is Danny Hansen. I work for a small consultancy company in Denmark that only do Microsoft apps. I'm the lead designer there, and what I see is a huge challenge in developers, let's say hobby developers doing apps. You have this great guidelines for both the phone and the store platform, but everybody uses the same template, and then we all end up having like 2,000 or 2 million apps that all looks the same. If we see in the web world, though, we have, let's say, Twitter Bootstrap have huge design frameworks that can encourage and enable amazing designs fairly easy for developers that basically doesn't care about designs for good reasons. All they care about is creating a kick-ass API and amazing code, and that's fine. But what are your thoughts on how can we enable developers to create more good and good-looking visual designs?
Okay, well, I'm glad you asked that, 'cause it's a fantastic plug for our talk that we're doing at 4 p.m., which is called Design for Developers, and it's about giving some practical guidance. If you're not a designer in any way of how to think of a brand, how to apply it, and how to differentiate your app from the others, that's at 4 p.m. in 2022, I think. But to your other point about how on the web there are loads of templates and things, I think that's a space that our partners would step into. I would still class it in my mind as a template app. I'd still like to see some kind of innovation there, because it's just effectively swapping one template out for another one. But I think that there are some partners out there who are looking for ways to enable developers better. I guess it's a case of finding those ones and seeing which ones work best for you. But yeah, like we were saying earlier, we don't like all apps look the same. We want some innovation there. The difficulty is giving the devs the tools to be able to go and do that with. And that's a space we're still investigating, at least from my team's perspective.
Yeah, sure, because one thing I've considered doing myself in my spare time is to basically start releasing all these resources that can empower developers in creating great designs. But the thing is, of course, it takes time and it takes a lot of checking if everything works out okay. But I think if you guys could leverage some kind of platform or somewhere we can share these things and share these thoughts and experiences on design, and let's say developers or basically all apps, they more or less use the Segoe UI font, which is great, but typography is such a huge part of the branding, and if everybody used that same font, they don't differentiate themselves at all.
And those are really great points. Again, those are some things we'll be covering in our talk later on today. But your point about a community site for helping enable devs with design aspects, that is a great idea.
Yeah.
You should help us get that started. I think that'd be great.
You should give us your card. If you're careful, you might know the job.
I would love to. Another thing is, of course, if we see, let's take the phone platform as an example, there's the toolkit that can enable some kind of extra motion you can put into, let's say, the navigation, etc. But still, I think there's a huge part of motion and animation that misses, or the platform misses. For instance, our company, or me and some of my colleagues, we did the unofficial build-up for the Windows Phone and Store, and we've done a lot of amazing motions and animations, but we had to do all that by hand. So it's just another suggestion that we can find some way of providing this to the world, creating more fluent UIs and better animations. So if you guys have any ideas on how we can share that, I would love to hear it.
Yeah, I think there'll be a few people here who want your card. At the end of
So one thing I'll say at Xbox is I'll just admit, like, we need to do a better job of giving you samples, of giving you ways to kind of explore. We do tons of research, we do tons of exploration around design, around motion, prototyping. And so one of the things I think about working with app partners is that we hear a lot about what they want to do, and we're able to take those capabilities or the things that they want to do and actually infuse that into our templates and our samples. And we're really early at trying to do this thing across platforms, and so we're just getting started. So I will say that, but you touched on a couple things. So there's type, there's motion, there's graphics, and there's a number. I mean, really what we did with our brand language is just look at our roots, right? Look at the roots of great design. And so what I would say is, like, embrace those things, even though I think I was told not to say that word. Embrace typography, graphics, and motion, and then explore in those spaces. I think that's where we really have to take it, because those three things really ensure that we're scalable across all platforms, and that's really where we want to go. So there's a lot of work to do, but I will say, you're right, and we're working on it.
I would like to add one quick thing. In the new XAML platform that we released, the Converge one, we did build all the animation and all the controls for phone. So all the standard turnstiles and continuum, those are all built in now, so you don't have to do them by hand anymore, which is really good. And there's also opportunity for, like you said, in the toolkit and other places like that, for when you do develop more unique animations, to share those with other developers. But at least there are some for free now.
Yeah, sure.
That was a huge win. Like, it took a lot from design pushing to get that on the platform. And the only other thing is, like, the way we push the platform is when you guys, in your app development, you come up with different models or you have more complex things. So our first party apps aren't overly complex. And so, like, I know that, like, the Evernote guys here, and we spent some time at some of the Tap Talks, and that's a really complicated space to figure out navigation for. So the more that we get to talk to you and the more we learn from that, the more patterns that we can push into the platform and give better samples and better examples of, and that will help push our controls. Like, the controls are just a base set, and they need to continue to evolve, and we need to add more. And we utilize, like, what you guys are doing and the innovations you do to help do that. So continue to do that and have that conversation with us. It's important. There's also a talk on the animations tomorrow at 5, I think at 4:30 or 5 from Kunal. That would be really interesting and helpful to go to.
There's just one thing to add to that, is that we also have some partners who actually build frameworks and templates and
of course, we do the same thing, thing internally.
I agree. We need to be doing more in that space, but there's Infragistics, Telerik. Those guys are doing some great work as well.
Thanks.
Yeah, it would be great if there was, like, we really do need to work on a community, where people can share these things and, do a little bit more free-form exploration, examples, others, so people can learn from other people. So definitely we need to work more on that.
Yeah.
And definitely looking for those opportunities. So this is really good feedback.
Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, sir.
Hi guys, my name is Martin. I work for Antivirus Company, and my team are doing basically antivirus for business mainly. And I will be curious about your opinion for native applications. Like, what should be the general approach, or what are your general suggestions where the UI should be heading? How often should it show to customer or to the end user? And what will be the differences between the consumer and business applications? Like, where do you see the main differences in there?
Are you speaking specifically for something like a virus application?
Antivirus application, exactly, yeah.
So I think, from the user's point of view, something like that, they should never really have to see. And so there's, we use the analogy a lot of like electricity, right? Like electricity is great, it never gets any credit until it goes away, right? And then everybody notices. And so I think there's certain utilities, especially like things that come from the system that vary greatly in terms of their importance and interest to end users who just, they're too busy trying to play the next game or read an email. So I think that a lot of time should be spent when you're thinking through an application like that about when you actually need to interact with the user. And you have to be extremely careful with that, because if you interact too much, if you have too much to say to them, you will decrease the probability of their engagement, right? And so instead, they have to trust you. They have to trust a message coming from you, for example, that maybe there is something at risk, right? Because I suspect that's the number one scenario for you, is something's happened and something bad might therefore happen to the user. They need to reliably know that if they hear from you, you always mean it. And it's not just a FYI kind of thing, because it's those FYIs that really start to degrade the trust that a user has. And back when we were figuring out notifications, for example, on Windows Phone, we had the conviction at the beginning to say, like, these things, the little toasts that happen at the top, they have to be, under basically almost all circumstances, a piece of communication between you and another person. Because at the end of the day, that's the only thing that really matters to people, that they really want to be notified of.
So something like information, how many viruses were detected and destroyed, that's unnecessary information.
I suspect it probably would be. You're going to have to think through, like, because there's the flip side, and I understand that, of how do you express your value, right? How do you make sure that they understand? And so it may be, now we have different mechanisms for doing that, where you can put something into the Action Center as a piece of information. What's nice about that is you're no longer interrupting the user. They're like not in the middle of like trying to, text back to their wife about who's going to get the milk, and you're talking about how many viruses you caught. It's just not relevant, and it gets annoying. But if you can have a passive communication channel with them, then that tends to be, much more successful, where you're in the background kind of accruing that value.
Okay, and what about the differences between consumer and the business? So for example, you are an employee having an endpoint antivirus system, and you are a consumer like the end user as we are, having the antivirus
Well, I don't
protection.
think the user needs change as a function of their context, right? I think in that case, it really is, your customer probably is different, right? Like when you are looking at the enterprise customer, it depends on, is your customer that person, the information worker that's sitting at their desk, or is your customer the IT guy that's rolling out and so for him then, frankly, you have to try to balance those two needs, because they may actually be different, right? And so how do you, again, accrue that value to your real customer, who is the IT pro?
That's correct.
And then how often do you have to intervene on the IW, who, frankly has better stuff to do in Excel and on Facebook?
Yeah, that's correct. Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Gary. I lead a team of designers doing cross-platform enterprise-grade mobile apps. And so my question is kind of a higher level one, which is with apps, it's so blue sky. There's so many different things you can do. It's in your process, what's the first step that you take to kind of narrow down and focus in on one topic that you want to address, and then how do you kind of work that topic into an actual idea that can be then shown on a screen?
I love this question.
Yeah.
I think you have to identify what the problem you're trying to solve is. And you might have multiple problems you want to solve, but really spend your time. We spend a lot of time thinking about what's the problem statement, what are we really trying to help them do? And spending our time focusing on that and really spend a lot of time rationalizing, why do we think that's the problem? Why do we think the user's running into this? Or why do we think there's an opportunity there to add some value? And if the more time you spend focusing on that and honing in on that, the more delightful your app will be, because it will actually solve a particular issue really well. You could solve 10 issues mediocre, right? Like you can solve 10 of them okay. But if you solve one of them or maybe 2 of them really well, then that's where the value will come in.
The other thing is just to really think hard about who you're solving it for. And just to this antivirus point, I mean, we all probably are in this room are pretty technical, and we might care that you got rid of all the viruses or that we're clear, because we're all kind of nerds, right? But there aren't that many people out there that really care about that. So focus in on who the user is that may not be yourself, and the problems that you have with the computer and with this particular app problem that you're trying to solve.
When we're building apps for large enterprises, they often have the app represented in a different way already, such as a large business system or a website that they want to bring into the app world, either on a tablet or a phone or whatever. So the challenges that Tom and I face usually are, we have this enormous app, how on earth are we going to fit it into a Windows Phone or a Windows 8 app? And that boils down exactly to what Laurie was saying earlier about it's a case of figuring out what the best, it's not just figuring out what problem we want to solve, but also the best problems to solve. Because there are some things that just are not best solved through a phone UI or through a tablet UI that are best solved through, sitting at a desk with a keyboard and mouse, especially in an enterprise space where you can slice the problem in different ways. We had a customer who basically wanted us to replicate Excel on a phone, and it just wouldn't work. So we boiled it down to what the actual problem we were trying to solve was, and the best way we could fix that problem. And then the other issues that came out of it, we looked at other ways we could do that, maybe through other apps, or maybe through web, or through other places. It's not necessarily a case of putting everything onto one app on one device.
And also, I would, as a researcher, I feel compelled to say, like, the more you can interact with those customers, the more you can take a step back and observe what they are doing, that will get you to the problem statement. That will get you to the insight of what your application is trying to deliver. By just talking about them theoretically, you're missing many layers of rich content, rich context, and the nuances of just being human and how we behave. And so spending just a little bit of time with the real people will give you better direction than any conversation you can have in a conference room.
I think once we've established the problem as well, and then we're trying to think about the solution, I think when I look at like the transformational like apps, the really massive success stories, the reason they've been so successful in my mind is because they've solved that problem and they've nailed it really, really well. They're really focused on that task, and it's really easy to get from one end to the other. So that's something that we really try to do when we're developing apps, is to make sure that the task is really easy to do for the user. Cutting's usually harder than it is actually adding features, and that's something that we look at when we've actually started to put things down either on paper or we've started to build prototypes.
When I'm looking at an app that we're designing, I usually try to get at a glance, if I'm thinking about what we're putting on the screen, if I as a user see more than a couple of things that I want to take action on, then I usually want to trim it back. I say like more than 3 main things on a screen, and I'm over it already. So then I try to reduce, and then that's how you prioritize. Like, what's the hardest thing to do is trying to figure out what's most important. But if you stack rank them and prioritize them in some kind of order, then eliminate things that you think aren't primary.
Eddie, I think you have something that you'd like to add.
Yeah, I was going to take a different bit. I think I agree with everyone here. I was going to take a little bit different approach, which is, why does your app exist? And that's probably the way that I would approach it, because, I mean, if I think about why I'm at Microsoft, I mean, I want to make people's lives better. If I think about why, that usually drives kind of where you should actually go in terms of the things that you're trying to design. And so that's probably where I would start, is like, why does your app exist? And then once you figure that out, then you can figure out the how and the what, and you can solve it from there.
I have a session at 5:30 today, specifically about figuring out your strategy for app development. So if you can make it, it's right after these guys with the brain.
Dominating the world.
Exactly. Strategies for world domination.
Yep. So, and
Pretty
then just to have you guys elaborate just a little bit further. In my process, once I've identified something, one of the techniques I use is, whiteboard and doing a mind map. What other techniques do you use similar to that to help you kind of crystallize that idea? Because once you have it in your head, I need to get it out as quickly as I can so I can show other people.
Recently, the last few months, we've tended to put together small prototypes. I think the Microsoft tools for doing that, such as like Blend, and just using the Visual Studio templates, have been really great, especially when we're investigating motion. That's something we've done quite a lot of work on, and we're focusing a lot more on when we're building apps. So prototyping is definitely something, but on top of that, obviously all of the wireframing and the IAs and whiteboarding. But yeah, I'd say prototyping.
I think that the stage that I particularly love is we do something similar. We don't necessarily mind map it, but we'll sit in a room. We'll also get the devs involved. It's not just the design team at this stage, because they have to build the thing. So there's no point us designing something that's impossible. We'll talk through it, and then we'll fill whiteboard after whiteboard or sketchpad after sketchpad with ideas. But we can normally find a good time frame to start to then crystallize these down, and we'll probably end the session with a few sketches of key screens on a whiteboard, a few ideas what people need to go and investigate. So the devs will go off and look at anything they need to do in terms of custom controls or strange APIs or whatever, and then we'll start to refine those kind of basic designs. But it gives the whole team a direction to move forward with.
A caveat to prototypes. So we've built a few, and then I've shown them to internal and sometimes external people, and their expectations are set, and they're like, "Oh, you've nearly done, you're nearly finished." Where we're really quite clear now about this is a prototype. So that's one caveat.
I think the level of fidelity is really interesting. To do rapid, low fidelity prototyping on napkins is fine, but to get the ideas across, because it's never going to be the first idea, the first solution you come to. It's going to be, the combination of multiple solutions that you look at where you're going to get the aha, like this is the right way, and doing as many of those as you can. Like napkin sketching is fine. Whiteboarding is fantastic for those discussions and getting those ideas filtered down and refined.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Well, I was just going to say another tool that we use a lot in this early stage when we're doing all these brainstorming and affinitizing ideas is we just create goals for ourselves. And I'm going to go back to that number 3, like 3, 4 goals, design goals, experience goals, principles, things like that. And then you can always point back to those and see, like, am I doing what I set out to do from the beginning? As things start to evolve and iterate over time, then you end up right back where you started if you kind of keep that grounding in that foundation.
I think your point about getting everything out so that people can actually get a visual picture of what it is that you're trying to build is the best way to actually, for people to understand what it is and to give you feedback and to iterate on it. And I think once you do start visualizing, you can get it into a form, even in the early phases where you can start to get usability feedback. I'm kind of pointing at Amy because I'm sure she can elaborate on that as well. The sooner you can start getting that feedback, the better, because then you can, you want to iterate, you want to find the best solution, so.
I guess just one small thing. The thing I love doing as well in these, ideation meetings is I like to look at how other people have solved the same problem or similar problems to see what I can learn from them. Or if there's a particular inspiring app, if there's anything that we particularly think would work with what we're doing now. Because very often somebody solved a similar problem, and they might not have solved it well, but we can learn from the feedback in the store, or we can learn through playing with ourselves the mistakes not to make, as well as the things we definitely need to hit in order for it to be a good experience. So there's a lot of market research you can already do just by seeing what else is out there.
Awesome, thank you. I think I'll turn the floor over now before I just end up going
Yeah.
forever.
And we actually have run over from a timing standpoint, but I know there are a couple people with some questions, so we'll go ahead and answer those. And then I just want to also remind people that we'll be in 2 different areas later on today and tomorrow. One is the expert zone here on the 2nd floor behind the purple wall at the end, and people are scheduled in order to be there. Some of us will be there immediately after this session. And then also, you can schedule time for one-on-one to look specifically at the app challenges that you have. And there it is down in the area where the food is. And just on the left-hand side, it says expert one-on-one, and you can come there and schedule some time in order to meet also. So, are a couple final questions?
Yeah, well, you were waiting longer.
Go ahead, I already had one.
Okay. just kind of talking about, I guess, right now what I'm doing is a bunch of enterprise level redesign of stuff that has to run on like IE8, things like that. And I know moving forward, I want people to be using better apps, better experiences. But just in trying to, I guess, plan that out, how many people do you guys usually have working with you, just like in a staffing thing? Because right now, like where I am, a large meeting happened and they were like, oh, we have a great UI designer here. They wanted to use like 6 people, and then they come back and they're like, oh no, we got a good guy here. So in all this stuff where like massive prototyping, good things, I'm just curious, how many people do you guys typically have approaching like an app redesign? Because I want to be able to go back to them and be like, hey, this is a little nutty what you're asking.
It really depends.
Yeah.
I was going to say it'll range within this group, but maybe each group can give an idea.
Yeah, I'm a little bit nervous to answer this question as well. Like, as Laura said, it really does vary on the size of the project and the features that need to be built. Our team tend to be very agile, and the entire team, including test and dev and design, is often only about 6 people.
Okay.
And we'll build an app over about 2 or 3 months.
Nice.
So we just have to be competitive, I guess.
Yeah.
It totally depends on the timelines as well. When we need to do something really quickly, we will put more UX resource onto it so we can iterate much faster and start building the screens out faster as well.
And in your case with enterprise apps, I would imagine it does seem a little bit
there's
hard to do it with one person, right?
Yeah.
So that's the thing with ours. Some of our apps are a little bit simpler, and so we'll have maybe a designer and a design lead focused on one app.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's another designer, but it's usually 1 or 2 people looking at it from a design perspective with a research person involved. But as soon as an app gets really complex like that, I imagine, I'm not on the Bing apps, but the Bing apps are a little bit more complex with a lot of navigation and functionality.
Yeah.
They probably have more designers on that, so I would encourage them to give you some help.
All right. It was just it was a curiosity thing because just walking into projects and like, oh, here we go, and then I'm like, oh, this is going to be a little nutty. So
yeah.
All right. Cool.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
And do you still? Okay. That sounds good. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.